Okay, so this is going to be our video lecture over the respiratory system. And before we get into the respiratory system itself, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour and go back to our cardiovascular chapter. Now, I had mentioned last time that our cardiovascular chapter is a little bit longer because we need to go through the structures, we need to go through the blood, we need to go through blood typing, and there's just a lot of information. We used to spread it out over 2 weeks, and with this new format, we just need to confine that into 1 week. And so I am going to go back and cover just a little bit of information on the cardiovascular system. And I've actually made that slide one of your packet for this week, and then we'll move on with the respiratory system. Now, one of the things that we didn't talk about last time is the classification of blood vessels. Now, in the human body, you have three main types of blood vessels, which are the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. For some reason, people will use the word vein to talk about all of the blood vessels, and you can't. Because when you say the word vein, you are talking about a very specific type of blood vessel. And as we talk through this, you'll see very quickly why we have to use specific terms to refer to the right blood vessel, the one that we are trying to identify. Now, if you look at the slide, I realize there's more than three on here, and that's because we've got some smaller branches, but the three main types of blood vessels are going to be the arteries, the capillaries, and the veins. So when we look at the different types of blood vessels, starting with the arteries are going to be the largest blood vessels that we have. And when you have blood that is contained within an artery, there are some things that you know right off the bat. Number one, it's moving away from the heart. And the easiest way to remember that is artery and away. Both start with the letter A. So any blood that is being carried in an artery is going to be moving away from the heart, going out to the body and all of the structures of the body. Now, the blood that is going to be held in your arteries is also going to be high in oxygen. And the reason that we can tell that is if it's moving away from the heart, it's also just left the lungs. And the lungs are where that exchange of gas happens. Blood is going to drop off all the waste product it had picked up from circulating through the body. It's going to pick up more oxygen, and then it's going to get pushed out and go back out to all the different areas of the body itself. So arteries, largest blood vessels that we have, they are going to carry blood away from the heart, and they are going to carry blood that is high in oxygen. Within your arteries, they also have the thickest walls of all of the blood vessels, and that's because of their close proximity to the heart and the amount of force that the blood is being pushed through them. They have to have very thick walls so they can stand up to that force from the heart every time that it beats. As the arteries start to move away from the heart, they will eventually branch down and get smaller, and they will start to get thinner walls. And the reason that this is important is because with the thick walls of the arteries, it makes it very hard for the blood cells to be able to move in and out of the blood vessels and get to cells. So as we move further away from the heart and the pressure starts to decrease, now the blood vessels are going to get a little bit smaller in size. Like I said, the walls will start to thin out. And those initial branches, smaller branches, are called the arterioles. We continue to make our way away from the heart, and those blood vessels will continue to branch down and get smaller and smaller. And then they eventually transition into what are known as capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest of the blood vessels that we have. And a average capillary in the human body is going to be about the size of a strand of hair. So if you look at one single strand of hair off of your head, that's about the size of your capillary blood vessels. They are so small that your red blood cells are only able to travel through them in a single file line. So your red blood cells can't pass through side by side. They have to be one after the other just because of the small size of those particular blood vessels. Now, the capillaries are extremely important because this is where your transition of blood vessels is really going to happen. Arteries are moving away from the heart, then we get into the capillaries. And as the capillaries start to transition and come back to the heart, they are going to start collecting blood and getting that blood ready to be deposited back in the heart. So the blood vessels will start to merge together and get larger and larger in size. As those capillaries start to fuse together, they are going to become what we call venules. And those venules will continue to merge together and they will eventually reach the vein status. If you kind of think of it as being, if you've ever seen raindrops on your windshield and two raindrops run into each other, they will merge together and become a bigger raindrop. That's what happens with our blood vessels. So as they start to make their way back to the heart, they start merging together and getting larger in size. Now with the vein is going to carry blood back to the heart. So if that's the direction the blood is going, we know it's in a vein, and it's also going to carry blood that is low in oxygen. As that blood's been circulating through our body and passing by all of our cells, it's been giving up the oxygen it has so that the cells can get that oxygen. And so as that exchange has happened, the amount of O2 in our blood is going to start to drop. Now, in one cycle through the body, so as that blood is making our way through our system, only about 30% of the oxygen content is going to get used up. So it's depleted, it's lower than what it should be. But if something would happen and prevent you from taking a breath and getting more oxygen in, that blood could circulate through your system again and still be supplying oxygen to your cells. And so that's why if somebody has a restricted airway, death is not instantaneous, because that blood is still going to have some oxygen content to it and it can keep circulating through the body. Like I said, in one trip from the heart through the body back to the heart, you're using about 30% of your oxygen content. Now, blood will actually change color based on how much oxygen it has in it. The more oxygen that your blood has, the brighter red the color. The less oxygen that it has, the darker the red becomes. But it's going to be some variance of red, just depends on how much oxygen it has. High oxygen, very bright red color. Low oxygen, very dark red color. So when you see an injury, you can look at the blood and you can tell if that injury has hit an artery or a vein, just based on the amount of, or the color of the blood that you're seeing come out. Now, to every rule, there is always an exception, and that holds true with our blood vessels as well. I mentioned that your arteries are always going to have high O2 and veins have low O2. The exception to that rule is the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins. Because of where they are in relationship to the heart and the lungs, the pulmonary arteries are the only arteries in the entire body that will have blood that is low in O2, and the pulmonary veins are the only veins in the body that will carry high O2 blood. And again, that's just because of the relationship of how they are positioned between the heart and the lungs. So that takes us into our respiratory chapter. And looking at the respiratory chapter, it starts off just talking about some of the basic functions of the respiratory system. And the reason that we do the respiratory system right behind the cardiovascular system is because these are two partner systems. Neither one can fully do their job without the other. So when you get a nice deep breath of air into your lungs, the oxygen does not stay there. It's not about getting that air into your lungs, it's about getting that oxygen to your cells. So when you inhale and pull in that oxygen, it's actually waiting in your lungs for the capillaries to bring the blood next to your lungs so the exchange of gas can happen. And we can get that oxygen back into our blood supply, circulate it through the body again, and get that oxygen delivered to all of the cells of the body. So respiratory system gets the air in, and then the cardiovascular system is actually going to be responsible for now taking that oxygen and delivering it to its ultimate destination, which are all the cells of your body. Any living cell in your body has to have access to oxygen in order to stay alive. Now, your cells have to be within 2 millimeters of a working blood vessel. Even if it doesn't have direct contact to a blood vessel, If it's within 2 millimeters, it can use a process called diffusion to get the oxygen from the blood vessel to the cell. So there is an exchange there, like I said, even if it's not direct contact. So looking at some of the things that our respiratory system does: ventilation, internal and external respiration, transport of gases, and cellular respiration. So external and internal respiration, we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Ventilation, just moving air in and out. And cellular respiration was something that we talked about very early on in semester 1. And cellular respiration is the actual cell taking the oxygen and using the oxygen to build ATP molecules, which is our fuel source. So that was a conversation that we had a while back. Transport of gases, we get so fixated on oxygen that we forget sometimes about carbon dioxide. Our respiratory system is moving 2 very important gases through our body. It's getting the oxygen in and delivered to our cells, but it's also getting rid of the carbon dioxide. And what a lot of people fail to realize is that your breathing rate, how fast you inhale and exhale, is actually based on your carbon dioxide levels. And as those fluctuate, that's going to dictate how hard you are breathing in and out. Now, with the carbon dioxide, the problem with carbon dioxide is that it's in a gas form, CO2, when it's initially in our body. But if carbon dioxide does not get pushed out of our system on a regular basis, it doesn't take long before that carbon dioxide, that gas, will actually interact with the water in our body. And when you think about the amount of our body that is actually water-based, it's very easy to find. So carbon dioxide will react with that water and it turns into carbonic acid. The problem with that is our pH level has to stay at 7.4. That is a very important fixed set point for our body in maintaining homeostasis. So if we start hanging on to that carbon dioxide, it reacts with water and turns to carbonic acid. What happens to that pH level? That pH level is not going to stay at 7.4. That pH level starts to drop. We become more acidic. And as soon as that pH level falls from 7.4 to 7.35 and below, now things start to not work in our body the way that they're supposed to. And the further they drop, the more and more things that are unable to work in our body. So that is very important that we are constantly getting that carbon dioxide